Mexico, Canada and the United States have been announced as joint hosts of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The global tournament will head to North America after FIFA member federations overwhelmingly opted for the United States-led bid over Morocco's bid. The tournament returns to the US for the first time since 1994 after gaining 134 votes, while Morocco got 65 during the 68th FIFA Congress in Moscow on Wednesday. The vote by football federations was public, this in contrast to the secrecy that surrounded previous elections.
So we have a winner for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The member associations of Canada, Mexico and USA have been selected by the FIFA Congress to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Thank you.
Well, for more on the 2026 World Cup host selection, we're now joined by Dan Williams in Moscow and Adel Al-Mahroui in Cairo. Dan, let's start with you. Of course, 65 votes for Moscow. A rather dismal performance, some have said, and many pointing to a failure in African unity. What's your view of Morocco's failure?
Well, certainly there could be a number of reasons as to why this has happened, not least some in the build-up to this voted mentioned that it might be down to the treatment by Morocco of Western Sahara. Others suggesting that it's more to do with maintaining relations with the United States. Whatever the reason, it certainly didn't happen. A number of African countries deciding to put their votes somewhere else. And on the one hand, you could say, well, perhaps it didn't really matter, given, of course, the sizable lead in the end that the United bid indeed had. But in saying that, it sent out perhaps a message that if the United bid could pick up votes in Africa, then why should other places, other areas of the globe perhaps then also pick on Morocco? And certainly those votes perhaps quite telling in some ways. Perhaps if Africa had voted en masse in a bloc, it might well have persuaded other countries, smaller countries perhaps around Europe, that they too could, that the vote would have actually been worth something. So hard to say really. In the end, it was a pretty controversial, pretty comprehensive win for the United bid.
Indeed it was. Adele, of course, we've only seen one African country host the FIFA World Cup, and that was South Africa in 2010. And some are saying that this loss for Morocco is a loss for the continent. Do you think it is a setback for Africa's chances of hosting a second World Cup?
It was very well anticipated and a warm aspiration that was surrounding Morocco's bid from the entire continent of Africa, at least most of it. We know now that there are 10 African countries who did not support Morocco's bid. But as you said, the last time and the first time, of course, Africa hosted the World Cup within 2010. So now 2026 is out of the way. That's 26 years and Africa still hasn't had the chance to host another World Cup. Morocco, though, says it is not giving up. It is planning to prepare another file and go for another World Cup bid for 2030. So there is still hope among the Moroccan side. These more than 60 countries who voted for Morocco seems to have been quite a strong support and a boost that Morocco can still do more. It is one. There are actually few countries in the continent who can actually host the World Cup. Morocco is definitely one of them. And for Rabat to continue its eagerness and its spirit to go on for another round, this is something that is well anticipated for and should actually be supported in the coming, unless, of course, other African countries show interest in the next World Cup that will follow in 2030.
And of course, as we know, this was Morocco's fifth attempt at hosting a World Cup, but still what they had to offer was not enough so as far as member federations are concerned. Dan, what was it about the United bid that really impressed the voting member federations in terms of what it promised over what Morocco was promising?
Well, first of all, the FIFA Evaluation Committee, their report of the United bid was far superior. There's a lot less of the infrastructure build for the United bid than there is for Morocco. Morocco's bid really, on paper, the amount of stadiums and infrastructure that was required in order for Morocco to host a World Cup on its own was significant, and that perhaps had a few alarm bells ringing. But the bottom line is that, and it was mentioned in the build-up, it was mentioned also in the final presentation by the United bid, it all came down to money. $11 billion profits, that's how much the United bid say will come from their 2026 World Cup. And what it means, of course, is that that money should, in many ways, be whittled through the various football associations around the world. And for many of the Africa nations and many of the smaller nations around the globe, that money is absolutely essential in order to keep their various activities going, their development programs, etc., etc. So the bottom line is, like most of these things, it does come down to that money, and the lack of that infrastructure build that's required really probably was the key and telling point from that.
Indeed, Adele, you mentioned earlier that, of course, 10 African countries did not vote for Morocco, but Egypt was supportive of Morocco's bid. Tell us what the reaction has been like there to the fact that in the end they were not successful.
Egyptians were not expecting to see Morocco win, mainly because we already know that Qatar, an Arab country, is hosting the World Cup in 2022. So to have another Arab country to host just the next World Cup that would follow was not really expected from the global community to support, at least from the Egyptian side. Yet there was great disappointment to see Morocco lose, more so to see the 10 African countries that did not support its continental host that was bidding for the World Cup, and also 7 Arab countries did not support Morocco as well. Beside the North African Arab countries, who all of them have supported Morocco, in the Asian side, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, and Bahrain, 7 countries, Arab countries, did not support the bid for Morocco. They've mainly mentioned the United States' approach in 2017 announcing its World Cup bid, while they say that Morocco came to them asking for assistance very late, just 1 month before the assembly that we've seen today and the vote for the World Cup bid. So it's a mixed feeling, but the exciting part is that now that this has gotten over with, Egyptians get to be excited once again for the World Cup for the first time in 28 years, seeing Egypt that will be playing against Uruguay on Friday. So the World Cup fever will take over these disappointments, and people will be distracted. Football fans will look for the biggest football showpiece and follow closely.
Indeed, all eyes on the 2018 FIFA World Cup, which of course kicks off on Thursday. Dan Williams joining us there live from Moscow, and of course Adele Al-Marouki in Cairo.